Hello, welcome everybody. This is the Shure Designer Q&A with Jands, part of our Jands webinar series for everyone who wants a bit of extra learning in this time of very strange working circumstances. My name's Christopher Ling. I'm Business Development Manager for Integrated Systems here at Jands. With us today is also Jacob Mumford, who's one of our trainers as part of our application engineering and training team. Say hello,
Hi guys.
Jacob.
How you going?
Excellent. So a couple of formalities before we start. We do have a poll that Jacob's going to initiate soon, just to tell us a bit more about you guys as you're logging on. Also, Jacob's going to take us through the start of a project in Shure Designer, and any questions that you guys have during the process, feel free to put them up in the question or chat section on the right-hand side. And if we don't actually answer them during the presentation, then we'll come back to them at the end. But some of them you might ask, we might actually address during the fold out of the presentation. Jacob's going to take us through actually doing a project from scratch using Shure Designer, mainly focusing on what most people have been using it for, which is the MXA910. Then I'm going to take us into a live sample. So my setup here is an MXA310 with a P300. We're going to show you the interactions with that live and what that means as far as USB microphone sync and that sort of thing as well. So I'll hand over to Jacob if you're ready to go, and
Yeah, ready to go.
hopefully we'll get some answers from the poll soon. Thanks, Jacob. Take it away.
So I just have to close that poll to start sharing my screen. So if everyone just wants to put their answers in there.
We may give it just another minute or so while we're waiting to see if there's any more attendees going to join us. But feel free, anyone. Oh, there we go. There's another one there. Feel free to start filling up that chat board as well with questions. So we've got a good idea on how to help navigate this for you. And we want it to be a little bit more interactive. So we may even provide the opportunity for you guys to ask some audio questions towards the end. Hopefully we'll be done in about 45 minutes at the most, maybe an hour, but we'll see how we go. All right, let's just let it go over to, once we hit 10:02 according to my clock, we'll probably start. I think we're close to getting everyone in, not too far away. All right, Jacob, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Chris. So I'm just going to close that poll there, and I'm just going to start showing my screen. So, Shure Designer. It's basically the place where you go to create projects, manage all of your designs for any upcoming projects, as well as create templates and presets and everything like that. So I'm going to take you, as Chris said, through how to create a project and a location, and then configure an MXA910 as well as a P300. And if anyone has any questions throughout that period, feel free to throw them in, and I'll answer them as we go. So inside of the main window of Designer here, we can see the My Projects tab. I currently have no projects created, so I'm going to hit a new. I'm going to create this. Let's say we're doing a project for Big Bank A. They're doing some upgrades to one of their offices. So we're currently inside the project Big Bank A. We can now create some new locations if we like. There's also folders here. If we wanted to split up the different types of rooms, say to VC spaces and huddle spaces or different floors, we can do that. But for the sake of today, we're just going to create a new location. I need to give that a name. So I'm going to call this VC room 01 because they're going to have a few of these, and I can say this is a large VC room. Click create. That brings up a window. That is now my VC room 01. So we're looking at this individual space. What I'm going to do, we can see all the virtual devices that I have over on the left here. This is the selection that we can choose from. As Chris said before, he'll take you through the live mode if you had physical devices in front of you on your network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an MXA910 and a P300. Now, if I had multiple MXA910s, or if I feel like it for any reason, I can click on this one, go over to the properties, and I can change the device name. That can become quite handy if we've got two in the room and I've got an MXA910 front and an MXA910 rear. it can also make it nice and useful to identify and make sure I've got the correct 910 selected when I'm configuring or making any routes or anything like that. So what I'm going to do inside of my room now, I'm going to go to my coverage map. And we can see that populates it with my current MXA910. If I had multiple, you'd see them populate here as well as on our workspace. First thing I like to do, I like to delete all of the lobes. Reason being, I don't always want to use 8 lobes if I don't need to. I want to use the maximum that I need for that space to get the job done and no more, or the minimum, sorry. Some other things to note, I've got some options up here where I can show my grid or hide my grid. That can become useful when looking at floor plans. Snap to grid, so that just snaps the 910 to those individual tiles there. Show guides will basically show me where the top left point of the 910 is to the origin point, which is up in the top left corner there. And then snap rotation to 45 degrees, because currently it's only snapping to 90 degrees. So I want to make sure I'm working in meters for both our workspace and our 910. I don't want to be working in feet because we're in Australia. So I'm going to add an image to my workspace. I'm going to pick the floor plan that I currently have. And we can see that on my floor plan, I've got some ceiling tile grids that are 600 by 600, which is the same size as our MXA910. I've also got some dimensions along the vertical and the horizontal here. Now I want to make sure that this is to scale when I import the image, and I want to make sure the drawing itself before it was, when it was originally created, is also to scale to make sure that all of my lobe placements will be correct and will actually represent what will happen in the real world. So I'm going to hit orthogonal lock, which basically lets me draw a straight line without making it all wonky. I'm going to drag down my longest dimension here because this gives me more granularity, I guess, and less room for error. I'm going to release. This is in millimeters here, so I've got 8.394 meters. I'm going to hit the little tick to say yep. Scroll out and we can see now that it's we can see that the grid, the 600 by 600, is almost lining up with my ceiling tile grid. So if I turn up that opacity, I can see that the pink lines with the dotted black lines are almost lining up. So what I want to do is I just want to make sure that everything's going to fit with inside my page here. When I click off, we can see that I've lost some of the dimensions. So I'm going to go back into my workspace, drag it out a bit, make sure I get everything in there. And we can see that I'm still not quite lining up. That's what these little arrows here are for. We can see that my snap grid will line up with my ceiling tile grid. And I can hit edit or go out of my edit there, and we see that everything lines up. If I go back in, I can see that my ceiling height, I have a choice for the room to change the ceiling height. It is default to 2.74 meters. It can only snap on meter increments if you change it from the original. So if I change it to 3 meters, for example, my ceiling height of this room would now be 3 meters. We can see if I click on my MXA910 and I go to my device, I can see the height that the 910 is at itself. So I could set that to 3 meters if it was going to be flush in the ceiling tiles, or if I was dropping it down from the ceiling, I could set it to anything below that I like. Okay, so I will, for the sake of today, leave it inside the ceiling, set to 3 meters. And now I'm going to go onto my MXA910 itself. I'm going to position it in the room. So I want it close enough to the front so that when these front people are facing towards the screen during a VC, they're still going to be picked up by the lobes. If I place it further back towards the end of the room, anyone that's facing forwards they will still be picked up, but not as clearly as if I had the microphone in front of them. Now, obviously, I'm lined up to the ceiling tile grid here. I can't go any further forwards because I've got the projector. I've also got to watch out for any sort of air conditioning vents, any speakers, any light fixtures that might get in the way. So this is probably the best position that I can put the 910 in. So I'm going to add a channel, and we'll do this first channel in depth on its own. I can see as I add it, it begins as a wide lobe. So I have 3 options: wide, medium, and narrow. That's what medium looks like. That's what narrow looks like. You can see as I get closer and further away, the lobe starts to get smaller and bigger. That's essentially just showing me that the further away it gets, the less tight it will be in a sense. Now, I'm going to set that up to cover these first 3 people, and I generally like to work in a clockwise fashion. I'm going to scroll down while still clicked on this first lobe. And I'm going to just make sure that my talker height is set to seated height, because these tables aren't going to change, these seats aren't going to change. They're always going to be at 1.2 high when you're talking. I can change that to any height that I like. I've got that set to medium, so that's pretty good for my first channel. Now I'm going to add a new channel by clicking on the 910 and hitting add channel. When I create a new channel, I want to make sure that there's not too much overlap between the channels, because this person sitting here might start to activate 2 lobes. It shouldn't happen because it's the same voice, but it may. So what we're going to do is we're going to just make this lobe a little bit smaller. I might set that medium's still a bit too big for me, so I might say narrow. Okay, I've got a little bit of crossover, but that's okay. We've also got autofocus as of release 4.0 for the MXA910. Essentially what that is if this person here starts to lean back or stand up or they shift around a little bit, they're not going to sit outside the lobe. The lobe will follow them up to 45 centimeters in any direction. So rather than just dropping off completely, the lobe will try to readjust and autofocus a small amount to keep them inside, keep them clear and intelligible as well. So I've got lobe 1, lobe 2. I'm just going to quickly go around the room. I'm going to add another, let's say another 4 channels. So I'm going to set channel 3 there, 4, 5, 6. I'm just going to go through and set these so that they're encompassing the correct amount of people and everyone's sort of in the space that they need to be. And that looks quite good. These will all default to 1.2 meters high for talker height, so I don't need to go through and adjust that for each person. But say if we did have a podium up the front here, that it was a standing person, someone was going to be standing there constantly, I would need to make sure that I do change that to 1.5, 1.6, depending on the height of the talker, just to make sure that that's not down sort of at that chest level, it is at the right height. So I'm going to delete that lobe there if it lets me. There we go. Okay, so I've gone through, I basically configured the 910 for this room. Now I'm going to go through to my signal flow, which will bring across our P300 that I selected earlier and the MXA910 that we were just working on then. We can see the device names over there if we need to make sure what device we've got, and we can also identify if we had physical devices that were currently live. So first thing I'm going to do is, as you remember, I only had 6 lobes here. I could individually route these channels to my P300, which would also create the routes inside it, or the Dante routes needed. We don't need to use Dante controller now unless we want to route outside of the designer system, essentially, or the Shure system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit auto route. This will make it nice and easy for me. I don't need to individually do them now. It says, please select a microphone, which is my 910. Please select a processor, which is my P300. I'm going to hit route. And now we see that it's routed 1 to 6, but it's also done 7 to 8. Hasn't done the auto, hasn't done, sorry, the, what lobe is that called again? The auto mixer on the MXA910. I will leave 7 and 8 there just in case anyone comes along in the future and is wondering why inside of the P300 the 7 and 8 isn't actually routed. So if we needed 7 and 8 through the P300 for something else, we could remove that there, but I'm not going to. And one other thing I want to do is I want to take this Dante output 1 and I want to route it back to the MXA910's Dante input. Now this is the input for the AEC reference. Now, we're not using the IntelliMix DSP or processor inside of the 910, so we don't actually need this. But the reason why I'm going to have it there is because inside of the way autofocus works inside of the 910, you get the best results for the autofocus if it knows what the far end audio is. So it's just best to make sure that that far end audio is routed back inside the 910. Now, I can go into my once I've clicked on, I can go into my 910 and I can hit configure. And we can see that I won't move them because I got them placed nicely now, but we can also go through and we can change the positions of these lobes if we didn't have a floor plan and we were just, working by hearing how or where the best position for that lobe was. We can go through, we can look at our channels and we can individually change the levels as well as mutes, or we can go into the IntelliMix. And if we were planning on using the AutoMix with the IntelliMix DSP inside of the 910, this is where we could utilize those features. Now, I don't really need to change anything here. Note that the AGC is on, but that is just affecting this channel when it's going through the auto mixer. We're taking the direct outs 1 to 6, so we don't need to worry about this AGC or the AEC or the noise reduction or anything like that, okay? Yeah, so that's the MXA910. I want to actually optimize my audio because what this will do is it will take the devices that I have, look at the best setup for those devices, and it will push that optimized audio or the optimized settings to either the 910 or the P300, depending on what devices you have. So we can click view a list of change settings, and that will essentially show me for a P300 and 910, these are the settings that we're going to change to best enhance your audio experience. So you guys can read through that in your own time if you like. So I'm going to hit configure. You can see audio optimization was successful. I'm going to go into my P300 now. So click on my P300 there, hit configure. If I was online for the actual physical device, I don't have any in front of me, Chris will show us that later, but if I was online, I'd be able to change any settings on the fly. If I go into the auto mixer, the first sign that optimized audio has worked is here, mic optimization mode. We see the MXA910 is selected because we're using a 910. I can see that I've got Dante channels 1 to 8 going into my auto mixer. Now, just to make sure, or just to reiterate the point that I'm only using 6 lobes coming from the 910, I'm going to mute low or input 7 and 8. Now, if you remember before, the Dante output channel 1, I routed back into the AEC reference input. I'm just going to rename this to USB reference, just so I know that that's going back to it's my reference channel from my USB going to my MXA910. Now that's not actually, there's no audio feeding to that yet, but essentially say I had this plugged in via USB into my PC. I would want to take the USB input, which would be coming from the video or the VC software codec, and that would be going into my USB reference. So I need to make sure that matrix is routed. We can see USB input here goes to USB reference. Just going to cross check that there. And now any of the far end audio coming in would be routed out of the USB reference, which would then be routed into the MXA910's AEC reference input. So that would make sure that our autofocus is working to the best of its ability. Now, on the Dante inputs here from the microphone lobes from the 910, we've got, I won't go through this too heavily because I'm sure a lot of people have used it before, but we've essentially got some gain settings and mute there that we can use, parametric EQ if you wanted to set specific settings. We've got our AEC, so this is where our AEC will be handled. We can see that the reference right now is set to analog to speaker, which is what essentially will be coming from our USB input. And we'll be going, when it loads, we'll be going via the physical output to the speaker. So we can see USB input is going out to speaker, there, cross section. So I want to choose my reference there because that's the last place before it goes out to our speakers. And then our processing settings for AEC. We've then also got noise reduction if we've got any noisy like aircon systems or projectors, because as you remember, our MXA910 was seated right next to a projector. So we want to make sure that we're removing any of that noise possible. Generally, we'll start with the lowest setting. We'll start with off actually to begin with. See if we actually need the noise reduction, because if we don't need to add any sort of processing to the signal, we don't want to, because it's essentially going to make sure that the audio quality is as high as possible. Okay, but if we need to, we can set that to low and we can work our way up if we need to remove any more. AGC is our automatic gain control. We can basically set a target level. If I was talking into the 910 at the moment, you'd probably see this peaking around -24 maybe, depending on how hot the signal is coming in. We can set a target signal as well as a maximum boost and a maximum cut. That's essentially so that everybody that's talking into these lobes will sort of come through at the same level before it hits, or as it's hitting the auto mixer, just so that we don't get people too loud or some people too quiet. Now, one thing I like to make sure I do is I've only got 6 channels at the moment, but currently all of the microphone lobes can be open at once, which I don't really want because the noise floor will start to creep up. People might be having conversation or quiet conversations that we don't want to hear off in the distance type thing. So I'm going to set this to 3 so that I can only have 3 channels open at a time. Okay, so it might be 1, 2, 3, might be 4, 5, 6 at a time. The other thing I can do there is I can set priority speakers, or I can make sure that certain channels are always on. So if you had, say, someone standing at a podium, or you had, Mr. CEO sitting at the head of the table, you might want to make sure that his microphone is always on to always be heard. And there's a few other settings we can select here that you can go through as well. So that basically goes through our auto mixer. We also have the choice to go direct outs, which you can make use of if you, say, wanted to record something that was happening and you didn't want the gate to get in the way. But for the moment, we're just going our auto mixer out. Got another chance for parametric EQ with a bit of compression. And now we're going to route the auto mixer through the matrix to our USB output, which will go to the far end. So I just want to make sure that that route is actually made, but I think it is made by default. So we can see auto mix here, and we can see USB out. It also goes to the analog to codec output, as well as the mobile output. So the the P300 includes a TRRS 3.5mm connection on the back. So if someone walked into the meeting space and was on a phone call, they could inject that person onto the phone call, and they'd be benefiting from the great audio quality of the MXA910. So if I close that now, I basically got everything set up as I need. I can go through and look at individual settings here as well inside of my P300. There's a bigger screen for the matrix mixer, and there's my output levels that I can adjust independently if need be. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back into my overview, and this is where I will, Chris, if you're still there, this is where I'll pass over to Chris, and Chris can take us through the live mode and show us how to push and pull a design essentially from Designer. So Chris, yes. I'm going to share. I'm going to hand over the screen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Make you the presenter. Oh, not that person. Sorry, 2 seconds. All right, we're going to see how this goes. I'm clicking on Chris's name, and I'm hitting share or make presenter, but it's coming up with Keith. I don't know why it wants to go over to Keith.
It should have me as panelist there, sir.
Yes, I do have you selected. Now it's coming up with Graham Hicks. This is interesting. Gotta love technology sometimes.
It works great during practice, I'll tell you that.
It does, until there's other people joined, and now it's very unusual. I'm clicking on your name, but it's saying Chris Ling, panelist. I'm clicking and it's saying someone else's name there now. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pass it over to you. Let me stop sharing my screen.
There you go. Sorry, bear with us, everyone. Apologies for the glitches.
I'm going to try it, Keith. I know you're online. It's saying that it wants to make you the presenter. We're going to click it. If it does make you the presenter, just hand it back to me.
Oh, Keith's presenting.
Yeah, that's that is really unusual. There we go. Thanks,
Oh,
Keith.
here we go. All right, thanks. All right, so everyone should be able to see my screen here. What I've done is I've actually shown you what I've done set up at my little home office desk. Down the bottom left-hand corner here, I'm actually showing that I've got 3 devices online. So first thing to check when you've got your devices online is your settings. So here I've actually got a couple of different network connections that are available to me. And if I was to...
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Keith, we can hear you.
So I've moved it over so Chris is now the presenter,
Yes,
but
can you
it's
see my
still
screen?
leaving me as the active talker, and I can't hear Chris. Can other people hear Chris okay?
Yeah, we can hear. We'll just I might see if I can get rid of you as a presenter, as a panelist. There we go. That should be good.
There we go. Excellent. Okay, so if I was to change which network connection I'm going to use, I could do it here in the settings area. I can go to online devices, and just bear in mind, I know Jacob kind of touched on a little bit, is that Designer is being rolled out as the main commissioning tool and monitoring tool that you can use when you have your installed systems with Shure devices. So what that means is you can have multiple projects, as he said and showed you, but when you actually get to site, plug into the network and you can see a variety of different things that might be online. You could set this online devices to have a look at anything that's available on the network, or you could look based on project. So you can see here I've got a couple of devices here that I've already got designated to the location of my home office desk. So I'm just going to close that for a moment and go back to my project. Go to home office setup, home office desk. And so this is where, if you are not currently online, you would bring up your project and then connect to the network so you can actually decide, and then you can see in live mode what equipment is connected. Once you see the equipment, if it's not currently assigned to anything, like my IntelliMix room isn't at the moment, you can drag it and drop it into a section up here or on top of its designated ghost or virtual equivalent here. So if I was to have an IntelliMix room PC somewhere and I added it to the devices as part of my design, it would appear down here and I can click and drag it over. Once you've done that, you can select the devices you want to synchronize, and you can either push your design from your laptop or from Designer to the devices, or you even have the ability to pull from the devices back into Designer. But currently I'm all synchronized, so everything is up to date. If I was to go in and make a change to something, because I've got the MXA910, there's no coverage map. I'll also let you know that the key up here is indicating that I have enabled encrypted audio. So back in my overview, audio encryption is on. That means that there's AES-256 audio encryption on the Dante side of things, so only by handshake between the devices will audio be passing. This is very important when you're dealing with a lot of corporate environments where they're concerned about people using, listening to other Dante flows that might be existent. This handshake of synchronization is something that Shure do with their wireless microphones, as well as what's available on the Dante enabled items as well. So looking at the signal flow, you can see active channels. Now, at the moment, I can go into the MXA910, configure this, which is the replacement of having to go through the web GUI of the 310, which is what you used to do before Designer existed. So one of the great things about this is that you can have a look at everything in your environment without having to open a lot of different web GUI pages. And you can actually see me metering down here as I'm talking to you. So you can see I've only got one lobe active at the moment. If I was to add another channel, I could move that around. And as I make that change, that's actually changed the actual device configuration. So if I went back to my online devices or back to my overview, you can see now this is not synchronized, so it hasn't been a saved change. So if I wanted to save that change, I could highlight the MXA910 and choose to pull to design. So the live change that I made in the device would be now pulled and saved back to this device and to this design. But right now I'm going to take that channel away because I don't need it. Excellent. So as I'm looking at the channel here that's active, you can see it again. You can look at your channels and see everything's metering nicely. You can see the encryption is still enabled. The auto mixer, there's only one channel, so there's not much going into the auto mix, so therefore there is no auto mix available. Now as I dig down a bit more into the P300, and that's just coming up for us. So just give it a moment. It's a little bit slow sometimes, but you'll be able to see changes to device are made in real time, and pretty soon you should be able to see me metering into data input 1. And if click on matrix, one of the best things about this is when you click on the matrix mixer, it highlights all the routes. So you can see that my data input 1 is going to the auto mixer. Coming out here, that's going analog to codec. It's not going to the speaker, it's going to the USB output, it's going to the mobile output, which is what we want. And then you can see encryption's also on Dante output route. So if I was going to another device that's speaking Dante, that device audio is also encrypted, and that can be handed over and handshaked with another Shure device that's part of the environment. So as I drill down a bit more into the inputs, one of the great things I like about the P300 is that when you look at the parametric EQ, I come from a live audio background, so this visual is very familiar to me as someone who plays around on live audio consoles. It makes it kind of simple and really easy to understand. But one of the things that we always make sure that we do is commission with our ears. So as much as this is a commissioning tool, still use your ears. Listen to the microphone, listen to the room where you can, and that's where you can make all your changes, and you can do that live. So if I was to go into the PEQ, you can see it's currently flat. I can turn that PEQ on, and you can see I've already got a high shelf and a low pass filter there as well, a high pass filter and a low pass filter there. You can change those. I can click on that and I can change that to be anything. I can make it parametric. So therefore I can look at my width, that. Bring down the gain, I can click and drag. And with the width, I can make it tighter. You can look at your frequency, you can find out where you're going to be, and possibly you guys should be able to hear these changes live. Sometimes it might take a moment to take. And then also, if you wanted to, you can copy your settings and paste them onto another channel as well. And you can turn different filters on and off. So I could turn this filter off, and then I can roll this back. I don't know why I would roll it back all that way to 55. Doesn't really make much of a difference. Or I can roll it up. You can see the change I'm making. And then I can turn that off and you can hear those changes as well. One of the other things that's good to note is that when you're using this with soft codecs that are certified with the P300 via the USB, this is where you enable the logic. So if I was to have an MXA910 and the USB out of the P300 connected to Microsoft Teams or Zoom, I can enable logic here, and that's essentially the handshake done for the logic control. And that means you've got mute synchronization, you've got AEC handover as well. So apart from all of that, seeing things metering live, I don't think there's much else that needs to be covered in regards to this. So what I'll do is, Jacob, if that's okay, I'll hand it back to you as a presenter.
Yep.
And we'll go through the question and answers. If there's any questions.
Screen here. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about how the software works, or you know, anything to do with it, or any of the other devices, or anything Chris has gone through, just feel free to shoot them through in the questions section. One question that we do get a little bit that I'll start with is templates. So it can be useful. Chris obviously went through the whole purpose of Designer and what the software is for. If you've got, you know, a big building that you're going through and you've got a lot of rooms that are the same, it could be useful to make sure, or it could be useful to have the same setup to be able to copy and paste and use over and over again, rather than having to individually set up the same room over and over again. So what we can do is I can go into my project that I just created. I can go into my room inside of my locations, and I can hit create template. So I could call this BC room, and that's going to be my template. Now that'll open it back up, and we can see it's essentially a copy of what I've got already there. And if the floor plan was the exact same, it would copy that over in the signal flow as well. So I'm going to back out of that. I'm going to back out of there. I'm going to go to my templates, and we can see I've got it there. So I can open it up, and we've got a new button now that is create location from template. So I can say this would be BC room 02. I could give it a description if I like, and then I can select the project that it will be going into. Hit create. That will now open up the room itself. We can see the template is still in the background, so I'll close that. I've still got the coverage map and the signal flow there. And then if I just wait for that to populate, there we go. If I back out, go into my projects, we can see that when I go into my Big Bank A project, we've got that second location in there now. So it just makes it really simple. If we've got lots of rooms that are the exact same, rather than wasting a lot of time, we can just, you know, copy paste. That's what we like to be able to do. I think that's pretty much it in terms of Designer. I think Chris briefly showed physical devices. One of the new things that Chris, you don't have IntelliMix on your computer at the moment, do you?
I do.
You do? Okay, we might be able to briefly show that. So another thing that Designer is going to be used for is the IntelliMix room license activation, and as well as the way that we would install and commission a P300, it would be the same for IntelliMix room. So if I were to go into my project, the original project that I created, we can see that one of the virtual devices that I have on the side here is IntelliMix room. So just like Chris did before with the P300 and the MXA910, we can grab IntelliMix room, populate it into our virtual space. We can then grab a live instance of IntelliMix room, and we can drag that onto our IntelliMix room inside of our virtual devices.
If you wanted to hand back over, I can show that.
Yeah, I'll pass it over to you. We'll see how it goes this time. Early attendees. There we go. It worked for me that time.
There we go. Excellent. Okay, so you can see that up there?
Yep.
Okay, so you can see here I've got IntelliMix room in this other sample project that I have. And if I go into live mode here, you can see my IntelliMix room that's installed on my laptop is showing there. So as I said before, you can drag and drop into here, or I can drag and drop straight over the actual item there. Now, in regards to the licensing though, it sees that I don't have a license. So if I try to configure that, it won't actually do much for me. It'll just show me what the IntelliMix room is doing. So I need to go up here to go to licenses. So when you go to licenses, you activate your installations here. It's just warning me about license activations, and I'll be using it one license. So I could go click on here and then say activate. When it asks for activate, it will ask me to add in the license key that I've been provided with. I would do that, hit and I've read the agreement for the end user, and then activate. And that would essentially just make sure that the IntelliMix room is activated. The license will touch base with online and be available. The difference between a licensed IntelliMix room and an unlicensed IntelliMix room is essentially an unlicensed version will not pass audio. You can see here the red mark saying that I don't have a license allocated yet to it. If I go back into the project for test, unlicensed IntelliMix room is detected on here. And if I go into signal flow, as I'm in live mode, you can see the other devices that are not live do not show up, but my IntelliMix room does. So I open that up, and you can see a little bit under the hood for IntelliMix room, which is essentially a similar structure from the P300. But if I expand that, it's still telling me that it's not licensed, and you can see that on the right-hand side, these are all flagged. What an unlicensed version will do will just stop Dante audio or any audio passing through the outputs. So you would still get audio meeting for the inputs when you've installed it. You just need to go to activate the license for it to send audio to anywhere that's useful or anywhere at all. So that's a little dip into IntelliMix room, which I'm sure is a much bigger topic for many people. But
I
feel free to...
also believe we'll be doing a webinar on IntelliMix room specifically. So keep an eye out for any marketing material that we have, and feel free to join that webinar as well, where we will go through it quite in depth, and any more specific questions can be answered in that webinar as well. What I'm going to do now,
back over to Jacob. I'm just going to hand back to you, Jacob.
Thanks, Chris. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to wait for questions, any more questions, but in the meantime, we've got a few more polls that I'll launch. So, just seeing what the attendees and what you guys, what sort of experience you guys have with Shure Designer. We know a lot of people used to use the web GUI, or used the web GUI pretty much exclusively back when that was the only thing to use. Whereas now, yeah, a lot more people are starting to move towards Designer with the features that it allows us to have. So just leave that one up there for a few more seconds and wait to see if any more questions come back through.
And just bear in mind, one of the great things about Designer is you could have a whole floor or a building's worth of designs cataloged in your commissioning computer. And then once you plug into the network, deploy it all from a central location. And then have someone else in the room actually listening to it, and you can help you do live callbacks between different rooms. You can see various rooms in live mode, one at a time. Most people have only used Designer to lay out their plots for the MXA910, but with the Dante routes made, instead of needing to use Dante controller, that's made that whole conversation a lot easier, especially with the encryption as well. So that's been one of the bonuses of Designer, and version 4.1 was released just before ISE, or the week of ISE this year. And also in regards to that, the MXA910, MXA310, well, 310, sorry, in particular has had AES67 transport activated on it. Bearing in mind that AES67 routes aren't made using Designer, you will still have to go to Dante controller for that as well, or multicast as well. So multicast is the only other thing you need to go back to Dante controller with. Do we have any results on the polls yet?
Yeah, I've got a few results there, which is great. Thanks for helping out with those ones, guys.